This sleek modern train connects major cities in Kenya. Funded largely by China, the Kenya Standard Gauge Railway began operations in 2017. From gleaming railways to state-of-the-art highways, ports and power plants, Chinese investments have reshaped the African landscape. Like Kenya's landmark railway, many of these projects were financed by Chinese entities, participating in Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Since this initiative to improve connectivity and cooperation was launched in 2013, it has grown rapidly across the African continent.
53 out of 54 African countries have a memorandum of understanding with China on the Belt and Road Initiative.
But China's current economic slowdown, coupled with the prospect of Western trade restrictions and the uncertainties posed by a new US administration, have prompted a recalibration of economic ties between China and African nations. China's commitment to Africa was on full display in early 2025, when Foreign Minister Wang Yi embarked on a work visit to the continent.
The foreign minister will always make a trip to the African continent at the beginning of the year, and they will usually pick between 4 and 5 countries to go to. It's a tradition that's been ongoing for about 35 years.
In 2025, Wang visited Namibia, the Republic of Congo, Chad and Nigeria. In mineral-rich Namibia, he emphasized the nation's mutually beneficial economic ties. Wang's visit was aimed at advancing the 10 partnership action plans outlined at the latest FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit, last held in Beijing in September 2024. The forum, first held in 2000, has evolved into a platform for collaboration between China and African nations on many levels.
共同推动世界走向和平、安全、繁荣、进步的光明前景。
China and the 53 African countries that participate in the forum meet every 3 years.
Africa was never expected to become a global economic power. For over a century, Africa was treated as a supplier of raw materials, a place where wealth left the continent but rarely returned. Europe built industries, economies, and empires using African resources, and the world believed this system would last forever. But in 2024, something changed. Something historic. Africa and China formed a coordinated economic strategy, one that reshaped trade power, restructured resource supply chains, and introduced mutual tariffs reaching up to 200% on certain European products. This decision didn't just shift trade. It didn't just pressure European companies. It shocked the foundation of Europe's economic advantage. And for the first time in modern history, Europe is now reacting to Africa, not the other way around. This is the story of how Africa gained leverage, how global trade itself is being rewritten, and how a partnership between Africa and China is forcing Europe to face a new economic reality. For more than 150 years, Africa's role in the global economy was controlled through a simple formula. Africa exports raw materials. Europe processes them. Europe sells finished products back to Africa. This system created European industrial growth, European wealth accumulation, European global influence, and it ensured African dependency, African underdevelopment, African economic vulnerability. Europe didn't just trade with Africa. Europe structured African economies. Ports, railroads, and currency systems were built not to enrich Africa, but to extract from Africa. The model depended on one thing. Africa must remain a supplier, not a producer. And for decades, that model held firm. But Africa has changed. In the 2010s and 2020s, African nations began to shift away from exporting raw materials. Examples: Ghana and Ivory Coast pushed for cocoa processing and chocolate manufacturing. Zimbabwe banned raw lithium exports to force battery production. DR Congo raised royalties and invited joint ventures for cobalt refining. Kenya developed textile manufacturing hubs. Egypt Morocco, South Africa, became leading exporters of ceramics, fertilizers, and steel. Ethiopia and Rwanda moved into high-value electronics assembly. Africa was no longer exporting what it had. Africa began exporting what it made. This shift was not accidental. It was designed. And China played a key role in building the infrastructure behind it. China did not approach Africa with charity. China approached Africa with mutual strategic interest. Over 12+ years, China funded highways, rail networks, deep water ports, power stations, industrial parks, special economic zones, digital infrastructure, satellite communication networks, but most importantly, China built what Africa needed to industrialize: laboratories, assembly plants, steel mills, energy grids, logistics corridors, factories in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Egypt, Rwanda, Nigeria, Ghana began producing at a scale never seen before. Europe didn't take this seriously. Europe assumed Africa could not sustain manufacturing. Europe assumed African industry would fail without European oversight. Europe was wrong. In 2021, 54 African nations joined together to form the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, the largest free trade region in the world by population. This single move reduced tariffs between African nations, created continent-wide supply chains, encouraged African-made goods to circulate within Africa, reduced reliance on European imports for the first time. African products could outcompete foreign imports inside Africa, and the impact was immediate. Local manufacturing grew. Regional trade expanded. Foreign dependency declined. Africa was building its own economic ecosystem. Then came the decision that changed everything: tariff reciprocity. Meaning, if Europe taxes African exports, Africa taxes European imports. This resulted in tariffs up to 200% on certain European goods, such as wheat, processed food products, pharmaceuticals, machinery, vehicles, consumer goods. Suddenly, European products became too expensive in African markets, and African alternatives existed. For the first time, Europe could not compete. Europe's industrial economy depends on cheap raw materials. Without cheap, cobalt, lithium, copper, bauxite, uranium, cocoa, gas, fertilizer inputs, European manufacturing becomes too costly. Africa's new tariffs struck at the heart of European cost stability. Then, Africa and China took another step: local currency settlement. This reduced reliance on the US dollar and the euro. Without currency leverage, Europe lost one of its strongest economic tools: the ability to dictate global prices. Now, African goods are cheaper in Africa. Chinese goods are cheaper in Africa. European goods are the most expensive option. This reverses 150 years of economic flow. European governments never expected Africa to regain economic control. Europe responded with emergency trade meetings in Brussels, diplomatic pressure campaigns in West Africa, attempts to revive old aid for access agreements, lobbying African leaders to soften tariffs, but Africa held the line. Because this time, Africa does not negotiate alone. Africa negotiates with China as a strategic investor, BRICS as a currency bloc, Gulf states as financial partners, India as a manufacturing co-developer. Europe is no longer Africa's only option. This alliance is not just Africa plus China. It is a new economic architecture forming. African production, Chinese industrial scale, Middle Eastern financing, BRICS currency, clearing, global South trade networks. This creates a self-sustaining economic cycle. Africa produces, Africa exports, Africa profits. Europe is now on the outside of a market it once controlled. Europe is not collapsing. Africa is not attacking. China is not colonizing. What is happening is simply this: Africa has stopped accepting the old economic rules. Africa is no longer the world's supply warehouse. Africa is becoming one of the world's production centers. The era of extraction is ending. The era of partnership on Africa's terms is beginning. This is not just economic change. It is geopolitical transformation. The world is shifting, and for the first time in modern history, Africa is the one shifting it.